The spotlight was blinding, the expectations were sky high, and for a moment, it seemed like a modern fairy tale was unfolding on live television. The National Basketball Association Draft is a night where dreams are materialized into multi-million-dollar realities. On June 24, 1998, Keon Clark stepped into that blinding light. He was a towering 6'11" prospect with an unbelievable wingspan and a vertical leap that defied the laws of gravity. According to the official National Basketball Association draft records, the Orlando Magic selected Keon Clark with the 13th overall pick before immediately trading his rights. It was a moment of deafening success. Teams were desperate for a player who could protect the rim and run the floor with the grace of a guard. Scouts saw a franchise cornerstone, a physical marvel who could instantly change the trajectory of an entire organization. But behind the handshakes, the tailored suits, and the flashing cameras, a very different reality was already taking shape. When we look back at the public broadcast archives from that summer, analysts were praising his upside, completely unaware of the dark side of fame that was already consuming him. The executives who shook his hand that night believed they were investing in a future all-star. They saw the physical tools, but they entirely missed the psychological cracks. The signs were there, hidden in plain sight, deliberately ignored by decision-makers blinded by potential. The league was handing over millions of dollars to a young man who was entirely unprepared for the pressure of professional sports. And while the draft night looked like a victory lap, it was actually the beginning of a rapid descent. Because long before the commissioner called his name, an ominous warning had already been documented. The real story was buried in a confidential disciplinary file from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, a document that contained a single, devastating detail pointing directly toward the turbulent season of 1997. To understand the collapse of Keon Clark, you have to look closely at the environment where his professional habits were formed. College basketball is meant to be a proving ground, a place where raw talent is molded into professional discipline. But for Keon Clark, his time at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas was a masterclass in masking deep-seated issues with breathtaking athleticism. During the season of 1997 to 1998, he was an absolute force on the hardwood. According to the historical athletic records of the university, Keon Clark averaged an impressive 14.8 points and pulled down numerous rebounds per game. He was dominating his opponents, making the game look effortlessly easy. Yet, behind closed doors, the coaching staff was constantly battling a storm they could not control. Rumors swirled around the campus about skipped practices, erratic behavior, and an utter disregard for team rules. These were not just harmless college antics, they were blaring sirens. The situation escalated to a breaking point, forcing the administration to take drastic measures. Based on public press releases from the university athletic department at the time, Keon Clark was officially suspended and ultimately dismissed from the team. The official reason cited rules violations, a polite euphemism that shielded the public from the grim reality of his daily struggles. The establishment tried to keep the exact details under wraps to protect his draft stock, and surprisingly, the strategy worked. The scouts saw the suspension as a minor red flag, a temporary lapse in judgment rather than a chronic condition. They convinced themselves that the strict, regimented world of professional basketball would straighten him out. It was a fatal choice by the league talent evaluators. Despite the glaring disciplinary actions clearly documented in the spring of 1998, professional teams were still eager to roll the dice. They were about to hand him a multi-million-dollar contract, a massive sum of money that would soon become the ultimate catalyst for an epic disaster in the state of Colorado. The transition from college controversy to professional wealth happened in the blink of an eye. After a draft day trade, Keon Clark found himself wearing the uniform of the Denver Nuggets. For a young man battling silent demons, arriving in a new city with a massive bank account was the worst possible scenario. The lockout-shortened season began in January 1999, and Keon Clark stepped onto the professional court with the weight of enormous expectations. According to the National Basketball Association Financial Archives, his rookie contract guaranteed him roughly $3.8 million. That is a staggering amount of sudden wealth for anyone, let alone someone struggling with an intense internal crisis. On the floor, he showed flashes of pure brilliance. He blocked shots into the front row, threw down thunderous dunks, and gave the Denver fans moments of genuine hope. From a distance, it looked like the scouts had been right. The talent was simply too great to fail. But the dark side of fame is rarely visible during game time. It festers in the empty hours after the final buzzer, in the hotel rooms and the long flights across the country. The Nuggets organization quickly realized that managing Keon Clark required round-the-clock surveillance. Investigative reports from local sports journalists later revealed that team officials were constantly anxious about his whereabouts and his condition before practices. He was suffering from an invisible dependency that was slowly draining his potential, turning his immense physical gifts into a tragic illusion. The management tried to integrate him into their core foundation, hoping the veteran presence in the locker room would establish some boundaries. But the erratic behavior only intensified over time. The franchise recognized they were holding a ticking time bomb, a situation that could blow up their locker room chemistry completely. The tolerance for his off-court unreliability plummeted. They knew they had to make a swift decision before his value crashed entirely. The front office executives ran out of patience, and in a desperate move to cut their losses, they traded away their former first-round pick in January 2001. The phone call that ended Keon Clark's tenure in the mountains of Colorado opened the door to an unexpected northern revival. According to the official National Basketball Association transaction logs from January 12, 2001, the Denver Nuggets traded Keon Clark to the Toronto Raptors in exchange for veteran big man Kevin Willis. For the Canadian fans, this was an incredibly exciting acquisition. The Raptors were building a spectacular, high-flying roster around their superstar Vince Carter, and they desperately needed an athletic enforcer to protect the paint. When Keon Clark arrived in Toronto, he immediately clicked with the offensive system, transforming into a crucial rotational piece for a team with deep playoff ambitions. Night after night, he caught lob passes, altered shots with ferocious energy, and brought the packed arena to its feet. He quickly became a beloved figure in the city, an unsung hero who did the gritty work so the marquee players could shine. Sports columnists praised the trade, noting in their reports that the young forward had finally found a stable environment where his immense physical gifts could truly flourish. The team chemistry seemed perfect, and his statistical contributions were steadily climbing. Yet, while the public celebrated his rebirth on the hardwood, nobody in the stands knew the terrifying toll his hidden habits were taking on his body. He was playing some of the most effective basketball of his life, but his personal struggles were quietly escalating behind the scenes. The fans chanted his name, completely oblivious to the intense internal battle he was fighting just to step onto the court. And this dangerous double life reached its absolute mind-boggling peak on a historic evening in late March of 2001. There are moments in sports history that completely defy logical explanation, and the performance Keon Clark delivered against the Atlanta Hawks remains a physiological mystery. On the night of March 23, 2001, he stepped onto the hardwood and put on a defensive clinic that left television commentators absolutely speechless. Based on the official post-game league summaries from that evening, Keon Clark recorded a franchise record 12 blocked shots in a single game. It was a masterpiece of timing, anticipation, and unbelievable vertical explosion. He was everywhere at once, swatting away layups, erasing jump shots, and completely terrifying the opposing offense. Coaches and teammates marveled at his seemingly infinite energy reserves. The press hailed it as the absolute pinnacle of his professional journey, definitive proof that he possessed defensive instincts matched by very few humans on the planet. The local newspapers the next morning celebrated his historic achievement, cementing his status as one of the elite rim protectors in the entire league. It takes supreme physical conditioning, absolute mental focus, and lightning-fast reflexes to block 12 shots against the greatest athletes in the world. To the untrained eye, he looked like a machine, operating at the absolute peak of human athletic performance. But the truth behind that legendary game is one of the darkest and most deeply unsettling secrets in the history of professional basketball. Because the thousands of screaming fans who gave him a standing ovation that night had absolutely no idea what he had been consuming in the locker room just 15 minutes before the opening tip-off. The locker room is supposed to be a sacred sanctuary, a heavily guarded space where athletes prepare their minds and bodies for intense physical competition. But for Keon Clark, it was a hiding place for a relentless and destructive dependency. For years, rumors had quietly circulated among league insiders, but the shocking truth was not fully confirmed until several years after his playing days ended. In the documented transcripts from a county courthouse hearing in 2007, Keon Clark made a chilling admission under oath, stating quite simply that he never played a single game sober. The logistics of this revelation are genuinely terrifying. According to public court materials, he admitted to consuming heavy amounts of adult beverages before games, and even more alarmingly, during the brief halftime intermission. Despite averaging around 22 minutes of highly physical playing time per night against elite competition, he was operating under a severe state of intoxication. He somehow managed to mask the scent, hide his deteriorating condition from trainers, and outsmart the medical staff of a multi-million-dollar organization. It requires a staggering amount of deception to keep such a massive secret hidden while sharing a confined locker room with dozens of coaches and fellow players. Yet, he pulled off this dangerous illusion night after night, relying purely on raw, unfiltered athleticism to survive the grueling demands of the sport. But playing this high-stakes game of hide-and-seek with the league could only last for so long. His fragile balancing act was about to be pushed to the absolute breaking point during the intensely magnified pressure cooker of the playoffs in May of 2001. The postseason is where legends are forged and weaknesses are brutally exposed under the brightest lights. In May of 2001, the Toronto Raptors found themselves locked in a grueling, high-stakes semifinal series against the Philadelphia 76ers. The pressure in the arena was unimaginable, with millions of viewers scrutinizing every single possession and defensive rotation. Keon Clark was right in the middle of this absolute war on the hardwood. According to television broadcast archives from that intense spring, he was playing crucial minutes, tasked with defending some of the most aggressive and physically demanding scorers in the entire world. The physical toll of a 7-game playoff series is exhausting for any elite athlete, but for someone secretly battling a severe daily dependency, it was a living nightmare. The stress of the national spotlight only fueled his desperate need for an escape. He was constantly walking a dangerous tightrope, trying to maintain his professional disguise while the stakes grew higher with every passing game. Sports journalists covering the series noted in their daily reports that his energy levels seemed wildly unpredictable from night to night, a subtle but glaring clue that something was fundamentally wrong behind the scenes. He somehow managed to survive the grueling series without his dark secret exploding into the public eye. The Raptors fought valiantly, but ultimately fell short in the final seconds of Game 7. The season was officially over, but the most dangerous era of his career was just beginning. The playoff run ended with a heartbreaking missed shot by his teammate. But for Keon Clark, the real disaster was the massive financial contract he would sign the very next summer in the Golden State of California. The open market of free agency is often a dangerous trap for players who lack a solid personal foundation. Following his impressive, high-flying stint in Canada, Keon Clark became a highly sought-after commodity. Teams across the league were eager to secure his rim-protecting services, completely unaware of the heavy psychological baggage he carried in his gym bag. In August of 2002, the Sacramento Kings made their decisive move. Public registries of league contracts from that summer show that he signed a lucrative deal worth roughly $5 million. He was joining a legitimate championship contender, a franchise known for its beautiful, fast-paced offensive system and incredibly high expectations from a fiercely loyal fan base. But massive sums of guaranteed money and the relaxed, sun-drenched atmosphere of California proved to be a lethal combination. The Kings organization firmly believed they had found the final defensive puzzle piece for their ultimate championship run. Instead, they had unknowingly invited absolute chaos into their locker room. The rigid structure and strict discipline he desperately needed were instantly replaced by sudden wealth and unchecked freedom. According to team beat writers from that era, his integration into the roster was rocky and complicated from the very beginning. The coaching staff expected a dedicated, focused professional, but they were dealing with a man whose primary daily focus was merely surviving the agonizing battles with his internal demons. The $5 million safety net completely untied his hands, giving him the endless resources to dive deeper into his destructive habits. It was exactly during this fateful season that his once promising statistics on the basketball court began a rapid and terrifying plunge downward. The brilliant, high-energy facade could not hold up forever. The intense, unforgiving spotlight of a championship-contending team quickly began to melt away the carefully constructed illusion Keon Clark had successfully maintained for years. During the grueling season of 2002 to 2003, his erratic behavior became completely impossible to ignore. There were suddenly unexcused missed practices, unexplainable tardiness to team meetings, and a highly suspicious string of mysterious illnesses. The Sacramento coaching staff grew increasingly frustrated, sensing that his mind was millions of miles away from the basketball court. Historical basketball statistical databases reveal a stark reality. His scoring output plummeted to exactly 6.7 points per game. The explosive energy and terrifying vertical leaps that once defined his style of play had vanished, replaced by a sluggish, disengaged, and apathetic presence on the floor. The undeniable signs of a total personal collapse were written all over his official performance logs. According to reports from Inner Circle League sources, the upper management strongly suspected a severe off-court issue, but chose the path of least resistance, preferring to quietly manage the problem rather than confront it head-on. They tried desperately to protect the team's chemistry by keeping his rapid unraveling a tightly guarded secret from the hungry sports media. But his chronic unreliability had crossed the dangerous line from a minor annoyance to a massive organizational liability. The Sacramento front office finally lost their patience with the endless parade of empty excuses. Their tolerance completely snapped in the summer of 2003, leading them to urgently ship him away to the state of Utah. a place where his reckless daily habits were destined for a catastrophic collision with reality. The Sacramento experiment officially collapsed in August of 2003. League transaction records from that summer show Keon Clark was shipped off to the Utah Jazz. For a player quietly battling severe personal demons, this was the absolute worst possible destination. The Utah organization was legendary for running the most disciplined, strictly regimented system in professional basketball. There was absolutely zero margin for error and nowhere to hide erratic behavior. How does a man who requires a heavily intoxicated state just to endure a 22-minute game survive under a microscope? The simple answer is that he could not. According to the official historical archives of the Utah Jazz, his entire tenure with the franchise lasted for exactly 2 games. Just 2 games. This staggering number highlights the terrifying reality of his rapid physical and mental decline. The coaching staff immediately recognized that the situation was entirely beyond their control. He was no longer a reliable professional athlete. He was a liability unraveling in real time. The rigid structure of the Utah system completely broke whatever fragile illusion he had left. His massive athletic potential was completely eclipsed by his desperate need to fuel his hidden habits. He simply packed his locker and vanished from the facility. And this sudden, unexplained departure created a chilling ripple effect across the entire league. Playing only 2 games in the 2003 to 2004 season sent a definitive, undeniable signal to every other general manager. The doors of the multi-billion-dollar basketball empire were silently slamming shut, locking him out forever. The silence that followed his departure from Utah was absolutely deafening. In the highly competitive world of professional sports, an athletic 7-footer with elite shot-blocking skills is typically given multiple chances to redeem himself. But Keon Clark had become a ghost. By the summer of 2004, the reality of his situation became chillingly clear. Based on comprehensive reviews of the free agency market from that period, he received exactly 0 contract offers from any professional team. 0. For a man who was only 29 years old, physically in his athletic prime, and just a few seasons removed from breaking franchise records, this absolute lack of interest was unprecedented. The league executives had quietly blacklisted him, whispering in front offices about the terrifying liability he represented behind closed doors. Without the structure of daily practices, the constant travel, and the intense adrenaline of performing for thousands of fans, he was left entirely alone with his worst impulses. The millions of dollars he had earned during his brief peak were still in his bank accounts, providing a dangerous safety net for his downward spiral. Sports journalists completely stopped writing his name, and the enthusiastic fans who once wore his jersey quickly moved on to the next soaring rookie. He was a wealthy exile, wandering aimlessly through the darkest chapter of his life, away from the television cameras. This unsettling radio silence lasted for months, completely erasing his legacy from the public consciousness. But the absolute quiet was abruptly shattered in the spring of 2006, when his name finally resurfaced, not on a sports broadcast, but in a very different, much more alarming context. The transition from the glossy pages of sports magazines to the gritty reality of local police blotters is a tragic path walked by many former prodigies. For Keon Clark, the initial warning signs of his legal downfall were relatively small, but they painted a clear picture of a man spiraling completely out of control. According to municipal police reports filed in the state of Texas during the spring of 2006, law enforcement officers began repeatedly pulling over the towering former athlete. The charges initially seemed like minor indiscretions, There were citations for driving without a valid license and other routine traffic violations. However, his reckless disregard for authority quickly escalated the situation. Public court documents reveal that active arrest warrants were issued because he simply refused to appear for his scheduled court dates. He was treating the legal system with the exact same apathy he had shown his final professional coaches. These Texas traffic stops were not isolated mistakes. They were the flashing red lights of an impending disaster. They proved that the immense wealth he accumulated on the Hardwood was doing absolutely nothing to protect him from his deep psychological instability. He was speeding recklessly down a dark, dangerous highway, completely detached from any sense of normal consequence. These springtime legal skirmishes were just the opening act of a much larger and darker tragedy. Because these seemingly minor traffic warrants ultimately forced him into a heavily guarded courtroom in the autumn of 2007, setting the stage for a confession that would completely paralyze the entire sporting world. The transition from the Hardwood to the courtroom is a brutal reality for many fallen stars, but the scene that unfolded in October 2007 was uniquely devastating. Inside a quiet courtroom in Vermilion County, Illinois, the towering former athlete stood before a judge, no longer wearing a multi-million-dollar uniform, but the heavy weight of his own destructive choices. Based on the official court transcripts and public reports from the commercial news, this was the moment the dark side of fame was completely dragged into the light. During the hearing, he made a confession that sent shockwaves through the entire sporting world. Speaking under oath, he delivered a quote that remains one of the most haunting statements in modern sports history. He admitted that he never played a game sober. Let those words sink in for a moment. Never. Not during his rookie debut, not during his record-breaking defensive masterpieces, and not during the intense pressure of the playoffs. He was fundamentally relying on severe intoxication just to cope with the daily reality of being a professional athlete. This was not a rumor whispered by anonymous sources. This was a chilling, legally documented confession from the man himself. The spectators in the courtroom were left completely stunned, struggling to comprehend the sheer magnitude of his deception. But as the initial shock of his devastating honesty began to fade, a massive, glaring question immediately took its place. How is it physically possible that a multi-billion-dollar sports empire, equipped with elite medical staffs and constant media scrutiny, failed to notice a 7-foot giant unraveling right in front of their eyes? The answer to that burning question lies in the hidden blind spots of the professional sports machine during the early 2000s. When you examine the public rules of the league's collective bargaining agreement from that specific era, a terrifying loophole becomes crystal clear. The system was intensely focused on catching illegal performance enhancers, but the devastating grip of liquid dependency was largely treated as a taboo subject, something to be handled quietly in the shadows rather than actively policed. According to his official professional profile, there are exactly 0 official suspensions on his record for this specific dependency during his active playing days. 0. This staggering absence of official intervention paints a deeply disturbing picture of the locker room culture. Were his teammates simply adhering to an unspoken code of silence? Or was the front office deliberately turning a blind eye to protect their massive financial investments? Investigative logic suggests it was a toxic combination of both. As long as he was blocking shots and protecting the rim, the establishment was willing to tolerate the incredibly strange behavior and the lingering smells in the locker room. The league essentially enabled his destructive cycle by providing endless resources without demanding genuine accountability. They built a golden fortress around him, completely isolating him from the harsh consequences of his daily actions. But while the sports world looked the other way, another catastrophic collapse was quietly taking place out of the public eye. Because beneath the surface of his professional exile, his massive financial empire was rapidly turning to dust, setting the stage for a spectacular monetary freefall. To truly grasp the absolute devastation of his post-career life, you have to follow the vanishing money trail. During his relatively brief but highly lucrative stint in professional basketball, Keon Clark amassed a small fortune. According to historical financial portals and agent reports, his total career earnings surpassed $14 million. That is a sum of money designed to secure multiple generations of a family. Yet, the brutal reality of his severe dependency, combined with a dangerously chaotic lifestyle, created a massive financial black hole. Where did those millions disappear? They were systematically drained by endless legal fees, predatory acquaintances, and the staggering daily cost of sustaining his hidden habits. The definitive proof of this catastrophic financial ruin surfaced in public court documents. When facing serious legal trouble years later, the former multimillionaire was officially granted the status of financial insolvency, completely unable to afford his own legal representation and forcing the state to appoint a public defender. This documented transition from earning $14 million to requiring state-funded legal aid is one of the most terrifying financial freefalls ever recorded in sports history. He had lost the roaring crowds, he had lost his immense physical gifts, and now he had lost every single penny of his professional fortune. Stripped of everything that once defined him, he was pushed to the absolute edge of desperation. And it was in this dark, empty space that he made a fateful choice in the late summer of 2013, a terrible decision involving something far more dangerous than a basketball. The tragic slide from a celebrated sports hero to a regular name on the police blotter reached a terrifying crescendo in his home state of Illinois. When you strip away the millions of dollars and the massive support system of a professional franchise, you are left with a man battling severe demons entirely on his own. By the late summer of 2013, the situation had escalated far beyond missed court dates or minor traffic stops. According to the official indictments filed by the county prosecutor, in August of 2013, Keon Clark was formally charged with the illegal possession of a weapon and operating a vehicle under heavy intoxication. This was a catastrophic turning point. The public documents described a chaotic scene, painting a grim picture of a towering former athlete who had completely lost control of his surroundings. In the prosecutor's reports, it was noted that the arresting officers found him in a highly volatile state, a stark and deeply disturbing contrast to the focused professional who once broke records on the hardwood. And here is where the investigation takes a dark turn. Why was a man with zero remaining financial resources driving around with an illegal firearm? Was he trying to protect himself from the dangerous elements of his new lifestyle? Or was this simply the reckless behavior of a man who had completely given up on his own future? The local newspapers covered the arrest extensively, highlighting how his deep dependency had pushed him into a corner from which he could not escape. The system that once protected his every move was now actively working to put him behind bars. He was no longer a valuable asset to be shielded by team lawyers. He was a severe public liability, facing serious felony charges. And this time, there was absolutely no leniency to be found, leading directly to a merciless verdict delivered by a judge in the bitter cold of December 2013. The courtroom in Vermilion County had already witnessed his shocking confession years earlier, but the scene that unfolded in the winter of 2013 was entirely different. There were no cameras flashing, no fans asking for autographs, just the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of inevitable consequence. Keon Clark stood before the judge, a shadow of the explosive athlete who once dominated the paint. Based on the public registries of the Illinois Department of Corrections, in December of 2013, Keon Clark was officially handed an 8-year sentence in the state penitentiary. 8 long years. The magnitude of that number is incredibly difficult to process when you consider where his life had started. According to journalists sitting in the gallery that morning, the former basketball giant showed very little outward emotion as the devastating verdict was read aloud. He simply accepted his fate, perhaps realizing that the chaotic, destructive spiral of his life outside the arena had finally caught up with him. In the sentencing transcripts, it was recorded that the judge explicitly cited his severe history of substance dependency and repeated legal violations as the primary reasons for the harsh penalty. But we have to ask ourselves, was the justice system truly trying to rehabilitate a broken man? Or were they simply locking away a fallen idol who had become too dangerous for civil society? He was officially stripped of his liberty, trading his custom-tailored suits for a standard-issue prison uniform. The transition from a luxurious professional lifestyle to a cold, unforgiving concrete cell was absolute and terrifying. The heavy iron doors slammed shut, completely sealing his fate and forcing the man who once flew above the rim to spend the next 4 years confined in a space barely the size of a standard basketball backboard. Surviving the brutal reality of the state penitentiary system is a harrowing ordeal for anyone, but for a globally recognized, nearly 7-foot-tall former professional athlete, it presents incredibly unique dangers. Keon Clark entered the Illinois Department of Corrections as a high-profile inmate, a massive target in an environment where weakness is instantly and severely punished. During the painful period from 2013 to 2017, he vanished entirely into the shadows of the penal system. According to public state inmate status reports from those years, he was enrolled in several internal rehabilitation programs, attempting to finally address the severe dependencies that had systematically destroyed his entire life. Inside the walls, he had no access to the lavish distractions that once fueled his destructive habits. The daily routine was strictly controlled, offering him the harsh discipline he had actively avoided throughout his 20s. In the sparse operational records of the facility, it was documented that he generally maintained a low profile, focusing intensely on meeting the strict requirements for an early parole. But what happens to the mind of an elite competitor when the game is permanently taken away? Did the endless, quiet hours in his cell finally force him to confront the agonizing reality of his wasted potential? He spent 4 years reflecting on the millions of dollars he lost and the incredible athletic legacy he carelessly threw away. By serving out exactly half of his original 8-year sentence with good behavior, he successfully secured a chance to re-enter society. But while he was quietly serving his time in complete isolation, his former colleagues back in the professional basketball world were finally breaking their long silence regarding the dark secrets of his past. While Keon Clark was locked away from society, the basketball world finally began to process the sheer magnitude of his deception. For years, the locker room code had kept his dark habits firmly out of the public eye. But as time passed, and his story became a cautionary tale, former teammates finally started to break their long silence. During the mid-2010s, a series of revealing conversations surfaced across numerous popular sports podcasts and syndicated radio interviews. When examining the transcripts of these interviews with former Toronto players, a distinct pattern of profound shock and deep regret emerges. Veterans of the game, players who had shared the court and the locker room with him, openly admitted they were completely oblivious to the extreme severity of his daily dependency. Some described him as a quiet, somewhat eccentric presence, but nobody realized he was actively fighting such a massive internal war just minutes before tip-off. According to reports from these public audio materials, former colleagues expressed a heavy sense of guilt, wondering aloud if they could have done something to intervene before the situation spiraled completely out of control. It is a terrifying realization for any professional athlete to look back and understand that the man standing next to them in the starting lineup was fundamentally compromised every single night. The media coverage during this period shifted from anger over his wasted potential to a genuine, sorrowful reflection on the profound isolation of his struggle. But while the sports media analyzed his past, Keon Clark was quietly preparing for his future outside the prison walls. In the spring of 2017, the heavy iron doors finally opened, and he stepped back into a world that had completely forgotten him, making a deeply surprising decision about his next steps. The transition from the highly structured environment of a state penitentiary back into civilian life is notoriously difficult, especially for a man who had experienced the absolute extremes of wealth and total ruin. Upon his official release in the spring of 2017, Keon Clark faced a monumental challenge. He was no longer the towering athletic prodigy with a multi-million-dollar safety net. He was a middle-aged man carrying the heavy burden of a felony conviction and a deeply public downfall. But instead of retreating completely into the shadows to hide from his past, he made a conscious, difficult choice to face his demons head-on. According to regional press reports from the state of Illinois during that time, he actively sought out opportunities to connect with the local youth. He began visiting local high schools, standing in front of crowded gymnasiums not to block shots or sign autographs, but to deliver a harsh, unfiltered warning. In these public lectures, he stripped away all the glamour of his professional days, choosing instead to focus entirely on the dark side of fame and the devastating consequences of his hidden habits. He spoke candidly about his spectacular financial collapse and the terrifying reality of losing his freedom. For a man who spent his entire professional career hiding his true self behind a carefully constructed mask, this newfound transparency was a remarkable attempt at personal redemption. He was desperately trying to ensure that the next generation of talented athletes would not fall into the exact same traps that had completely derailed his life. Yet, despite these genuine efforts to rewrite the final chapters of his personal story, the cold, unforgiving metrics of his professional career remain permanently etched in the historical ledgers. When the dust finally settles on the tragic saga of Keon Clark, the sports world is left confronting a profound and deeply unsettling mystery. We are forced to evaluate a career that was built entirely on a fractured foundation. If you open the historical archives of the league today, the final numbers tell a story of breathtaking mediocrity. According to the official lifetime statistics, he played a total of exactly 318 professional games. His career averages finalized at a mere 8.2 points and 5.9 rebounds per contest. On paper, these are the statistics of a forgettable role player, a minor footnote in the grand history of the game. But anyone who watched him elevate above the rim during his brief peak knows that those numbers represent a terrifying fraction of his actual capability. The ultimate tragedy of his journey is not just the lost millions or the years spent behind bars, it is the agonizing question of what could have been. If a man could set franchise-blocking records and start intense playoff games while severely hindered by his own dependencies, what could he have achieved with a clear mind and a dedicated spirit? Could he have been a perennial all-star, a defensive player of the year, a champion? The answer to that question is permanently lost, buried beneath years of deception, bad decisions, and a system that failed to look past the superficial highlights. Keon Clark remains one of the most haunting cautionary tales in modern sports. A physical giant who conquered the game, but ultimately surrendered his life to the shadows. And as we look back at his fleeting moments of brilliance, we are left with one lingering, uncomfortable thought. How many other superstars are currently fighting that exact same invisible war, completely hidden in plain sight? The story of Keon Clark leaves us with a heavy heart and a mind completely full of unanswered questions. We have meticulously traced his steps from the blinding lights of the draft night in 1998 to the cold, unforgiving reality of a prison cell in the state of Illinois. We have uncovered the deeply hidden truth about his locker room secrets, his unprecedented financial collapse, and the absolute failure of a multi-billion-dollar league to protect one of its own massive investments. We have examined the public court records and the belated, sorrowful confessions of his former teammates. But the ultimate judgment in this deep investigation does not belong to the legal courts, and it certainly does not belong to the sports analysts who completely missed the glaring warning signs for years. It belongs entirely to you. You are the dedicated viewers who lived through that specific era of professional basketball, who bought the tickets, and who witnessed his soaring highs and devastating lows on live television. What is your final verdict on this deeply tragic saga? Do you honestly believe the league executives were entirely complicit in his downfall by deliberately turning a blind eye to his obvious daily dependency? Or was Keon Clark the sole architect of his own destruction? Did his incredible logic-defying record of 12 blocked shots in a single game convince you that he could have been one of the greatest defensive players in the history of the sport if he had only remained strictly sober? We genuinely want to hear your personal theories and memories down in the comments section below. Share your thoughts with us, because your seasoned insights and lived experiences often reveal crucial details that the official corporate records constantly try to hide from the public eye. If this deep dive into the dark side of fame opened your eyes to the hidden realities of professional sports, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We are constantly digging through the dusty historical archives, uncovering the buried secrets, and bringing you the untold stories that the sports establishment desperately wants you to forget. We refuse to let these incredible, complicated lives simply fade into the shadows without a proper investigation. Stay tuned, keep questioning the official narratives, and we will see you in the very next episode.